Good morning. Today we are working on objective CO25. I can interpret and create histograms. So we're continuing to work with those data sets and figuring out how to put them into that histogram. So our key vocabulary for this objective is the frequency table. It's a table used to group data values into intervals. The frequency is the number of data values that lie in an interval of a frequency table or histogram. And the histogram, which is the graph that displays data from the frequency table. So first you have to create the table, then you can make the histogram. A histogram has one bar for each interval of the table that contains data values. The length of the bar indicates the frequency for the interval. You can use a frequency table to help organize and interpret data. So our first step is to make a frequency table. So let's say the numbers of named stars in a group of 34 constellations are listed below. Make a frequency table of the data. So the first thing we're going to do is decide what our intervals are going to be. So when we're skip counting going up that vertical axis, what are those intervals going to be? What should we skip count by? So we can look at our numbers, and I see I'm just going to help us out with this. We're going to have the intervals of 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, 16 to 20, and 21 to 25. So all of the numbers of the named stars are going to fall into those different intervals. So then we are going to make tally marks to determine, so we have our interval. Step 2 is to make the tally marks of how many times a number falls in that interval. Oh, it helps if I spell tally correctly. So we chose our intervals. Now we're going to do our tally marks. So I'm going to look at 7. I have 1 7 there. I'm going to make 1 tally mark. I have a 5, so I'm going to make a tally mark where the 5s are. 4 falls in between the 1 and the 5. 10 falls in between 6 to 10. This 5 falls in the 1 to 5. The 7 falls into the 6 to 10. So every time you cross off a number, you put it in the box that it falls into. Which interval does it fall into? 6 goes down here, 8 goes here. When you do a 5 with tally marks, that's the one that goes across the group. So whenever you get to a 5, we're making groups of 5 with tally marks. So you just oh, you know what? I was looking at the wrong, I'm so sorry. I was looking at the wrong table on my paper. I made my intervals wrong. I should have read on here. The first interval would be 0 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, 10 to 12. That is my bad. I was looking at the book instead of at the paper. So I was looking at the wrong intervals to use. I looked at the wrong source. So we're going to start over with these intervals. I go with these numbers. I was looking at the wrong problem in the book. That's why it wasn't making sense to me. All right, so we're going to start over. The 7 falls into the 7 to 9. 5 is here. 4 is here. 10, 5, 7, 2, 6, 8, 1, 5, 1. So every time you cross one off, make sure you're putting that tally mark in the interval box that it falls into. So it's a little time consuming making your tally marks. So that's making the frequency table.
That was tiring.
So then you have to, the last column is putting how many tally marks you had. So you're just writing out how many, counting up those tally marks. So you start with your intervals, then you do the tally marks, then you count how many tally marks there are. So that's how you make the tables. Is that part making sense?
Yeah.
Putting it into the table? So we're going to go down to, I need to move my screen up. Now we need to make a histogram. So I have to put this back in. You should still have it. What were the numbers we had over here?
47, 5, 5, 3.
Okay. So first thing to make the histogram, you have to do your frequency table. Then we're going to draw and label our horizontal and vertical axes. So I'm going to do it right over here. So remember those two axes that we always have. So we're going to do our intervals are going to be on the bottom. So this would be name stars. And this would be the constellations. had 0 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, 10 to 12, and 13 to 15. And here we go all the way up to 14 here, so I'm going to skip count by 2s. So then I'm going to look at that 0 to 3, and I'm going to go all the way up to the 14. And I'll look at my 4 to 6, and I'm going to go up to 7. Now the bar graph, we didn't want them touching. The histogram, they do touch. 7 to 9, I go to 5. 10 to 12, I went to 5. And 13 to 15, I went to 3. Yes?
The 9 by the 7 on the bottom kind of looks like a 4.
That's the number 9. Yep, that's what happens when we use the smartboard markers. Sometimes they skip real quickly. So that's how we go from our frequency table over to the histogram. It's different than the bar graph. The bar graph, remember, the bars don't touch. In the histogram, they do, unless we have an empty spot where there is no numbers. If there's an interval where there's no numbers, then you have a space. But we had numbers in each of our intervals, so there's no spaces. Is that making sense? Figuring out your intervals, put your tally marks in, figure out how many tallies for each interval. Then for the histogram, you got your intervals, you've got how many go in each interval, and you plug in your bars. So we're going to stop our recording here. Well, actually, let's see if I can look at our table. Let's look at the table, that our workbook page. Let's look at that first problem that we have. We are on page 37 in our workbook. They have all the points on the football game. It says complete the frequency table using the data. They gave us some of the intervals and they gave us an empty interval. What do you think we need to fill into our empty interval? If we see 26 to 40 and then 55 to 68, what do we put into the missing interval? What are our missing numbers? If this one ends off at 40, what's this one going to start at? Penelope? 41. And if this one starts at 54, what does it have to end at? Sorry, it starts at 55. So this one has to end at 54. So then you go up and you start putting your tally marks in. 78 would go here. 26 would go here. 69. 37. 37. 73. 58. 37. 69. 48. 82, 27, 36, 37, 37, 73, 37, 54, 38, 28, and 29. So you make your tally marks. I have 5, 10, 11, 12 in that first interval, 2 in the second interval, 1 in the third interval, and 6 in that last interval. That's all we're doing here is making that table, completing the table. We're not making the histogram there. It looks like all of these are just completing the tables. So you just have to do frequency tables on this first page. So figuring out your intervals and then putting your tallies in. Go 1 for 1. You cross a number off, put the tally mark in. Yes?
What do I have to do for 3? Doesn't it already have a name?
So number 3, the total numbers of songs on different CDs are given below. Describe and correct the errors. So they made a frequency table, but they made a mistake. Find the mistake. Okay, so yeah, they did complete it, but they completed it wrong. So find their mistake. On the back side is where the histogram part comes in. So you have to, when it says make a histogram of the data, you have to make your frequency table first, then make the histogram, then draw a conclusion about it. And that bottom one, frequency table and histogram. So in order to make a histogram, you have to make the frequency table first. So it's not telling you to make a frequency table, but we know in order to have the data for the histogram, you have to make a frequency table. All right, so we've got 16 minutes to work on this. We're going to say goodbye to our friends at home.